My brother manipulated me into sending $6,000 by lying about his baby having serious health problems needing expensive treatment, but then I found out he spent everything on a luxury party, so his wife sold her grandmother's diamond bracelet to repay me and filed for divorce. I'm Vera, 38F, and I've been married to my husband Lainey, 46M, for 12 years now. We don't have kids, but we've built a comfortable life together. Lainey works in construction management and I run a small accounting firm from home. We're the type of couple who spends weekends fixing up our house or taking long drives to nowhere in particular. Nothing fancy, just steady and reliable. My younger brother Dean, 34M, has always been different. Growing up, our parents treated him like he could do no wrong. When he was 8, he stole money from our mom's purse to buy comic books and blamed it on me. I got grounded for 2 weeks until our neighbor mentioned seeing Dean at the store. Our parents laughed it off as a misunderstanding. When he was 16, he crashed our dad's truck into a mailbox while joyriding and claimed the brakes failed. Dad paid for the repairs without question. I could list dozens of similar incidents, but the pattern was always the same. Dean would mess up, make excuses, and everyone would accept whatever story he told. This behavior followed him into adulthood. He bounced between jobs, always claiming his bosses were unreasonable or his coworkers were jealous. He borrowed money from our parents constantly, always with promises to pay it back that never materialized. When he was 28, he met Simone, 32F, at a community college class. She seemed nice enough, worked as a dental hygienist, and came from a tight-knit family. They got married within a year. 2 years ago, Simone gave birth to their daughter Ava. I sent gifts and visited them at the hospital. Dean seemed genuinely excited about being a father. He posted photos constantly and talked about how fatherhood had changed him. I wanted to believe that maybe this would be the thing that finally made him grow up and take responsibility. Last October, around 3 a.m, my phone rang. It was Dean and he was speaking so fast I could barely understand him. He said Ava had been sick for weeks and they'd been in and out of the hospital. The doctors had run extensive tests and found some issues that required specialist care. He said their insurance wouldn't cover everything and they were drowning in medical bills. He mentioned numbers like $18,000 in total debt and said they were about to lose their apartment because they'd used rent money to pay for treatments. I asked him why he hadn't mentioned any of this before. He said he didn't want to burden anyone and had been trying to handle it himself. He said Simone was barely sleeping and he'd picked up extra shifts, but it wasn't enough. Then he asked if I could loan them $6,000 to cover the most urgent bills and keep them from being evicted. He said he'd pay me back within 6 months once they got their finances sorted out. Lainey was awake by then and asked what was happening. I explained the situation and he looked skeptical. He reminded me about all the other times Dean had borrowed money from our parents and never paid it back. But this was different. This was about Ava, an innocent baby who didn't ask to be born into this situation. I told Lainey that if we didn't help and something happened to Ava because they couldn't afford her care, I'd never forgive myself. I transferred the money that same morning. Dean called me crying and thanking me repeatedly. He said I was saving their lives and he'd never forget this. He promised to send me documentation of the medical bills and to set up a payment plan to pay me back. I told him not to worry about rushing the repayment and to focus on getting Ava healthy. For the next month, I checked in periodically through text messages. Dean always responded quickly, saying things were still tough but they were managing. He never sent the medical documentation I'd asked for, but I didn't push it. I figured he was overwhelmed and dealing with more important things than scanning paperwork for me. In late November, I started seeing posts from extended family members about an event. My cousin Rita mentioned she was excited for the upcoming celebration. My aunt commented on one of Simone's posts asking what she should wear to the party. I had no idea what they were talking about. I texted Rita and asked what event she meant. She seemed surprised by my question and said she was talking about Ava's first birthday party the following weekend. I didn't even know Dean was planning a party. Given everything he'd said about their financial situation, I assumed they'd be doing something small at home with immediate family. I texted Dean asking about the party and whether I'd missed an invitation somehow. He responded several hours later saying it was going to be a small family thing and he'd accidentally left me off the group chat. He said I was obviously invited and sent me the address of a venue I didn't recognize. The party was on Sunday afternoon. Lainey and I bought a gift and drove to the address Dean had sent. It wasn't their apartment or a family member's house. It was an event space at a hotel that specialized in weddings and corporate functions. When we walked in, my jaw dropped. There were at least 80 people there. The room had been decorated with custom balloon arrangements that spelled out Ava's name. There was a dessert table with a 3-tier cake and matching cupcakes. A photographer was walking around taking professional photos. A catering company had set up stations with different types of food. Simone's family was there in matching custom t-shirts with Ava's photo printed on them. Dean and Simone were dressed in outfits that looked expensive and coordinated. Ava was wearing a custom dress with her name embroidered on it and a small crown. There was a backdrop set up for photos with props and flowers arranged in elaborate designs. I walked around trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a small family gathering. This was an elaborate production that would have cost thousands of dollars. I did mental calculations based on what I knew about event pricing. The venue rental alone was probably $2,000. The catering for 80 people was another $2,000 to $3,000. The cake and desserts were at least $500. The custom clothing and decorations were another $1,000 or more. The photographer was easily another $1,000. This party cost at least $7,000 or $8,000, possibly more. Laney grabbed my arm and pulled me into a quiet corner. He said we needed to leave immediately before he said something he'd regret. I told him to wait and walked over to where Dean was talking with some friends. I asked him if we could talk privately. He excused himself and we stepped into the hallway. I asked him how they'd afforded this party given what he'd told me about their financial situation. He got defensive immediately. He said Simone's parents had helped with costs and they'd saved up for months because they wanted Ava's first birthday to be special. I asked him about the medical bills he'd called me about. He said those were still an issue but they couldn't let that ruin Ava's birthday. I asked him directly if the money I'd given him had been used for this party. He said I was being insulting and that the money had gone exactly where he'd told me it would go. I walked back into the party and found Simone talking with her mother. I waited until there was a break in conversation and asked Simone if I could speak with her for a moment. We stepped outside and I asked her how Ava was doing health-wise. She looked confused and said Ava was fine and had been healthy since birth. I asked about the hospital visits and specialist appointments. She said Ava had only been to the pediatrician for normal checkups and vaccines. I told Simone that Dean had called me in October saying Ava had serious medical issues and they owed $18,000 in bills. I told her I'd sent them $6,000 to help cover those costs. Simone's face went pale. She said there were no medical bills beyond normal copays that their insurance covered. She said she had no idea Dean had asked me for money. I went back inside and told Laney we were leaving. He didn't ask questions and we left without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove home while Laney sat in the passenger seat making angry comments about Dean being a con artist. When we got home, I sat at the kitchen table and went through my bank records. The $6,000 transfer was right there. October 15th. 3 weeks before this party. The next morning, I texted Simone and asked if she wanted to talk. She called me within minutes. She said she'd confronted Dean after we left and he'd admitted that there were no medical bills. He'd told her he needed the money for party deposits and that he'd planned to pay me back before I noticed. He'd convinced her parents to contribute money by telling them I was handling the venue costs. She said she'd had no idea he'd lied to me or to her family. I asked her what she planned to do with this information. She said she didn't know yet but she needed time to think. I told her I wasn't asking her to leave her husband or cause problems in her marriage, but I wanted her to know the truth about where that money came from. She said she appreciated me telling her and that she'd figure out what to do next. 2 days later, Dean called me screaming. He said I'd destroyed his marriage and turned his wife against him. He said I was a spiteful person who couldn't stand to see him happy. He said the party had been Simone's idea and she'd been the one who pushed for all the expensive details. He said I was trying to ruin his family because Laney and I didn't have kids and were jealous of what he had. He called me several more names before I hung up on him. Laney called Dean back and told him never to contact me again. Dean tried to argue but Laney just kept repeating that the conversation was over and Dean needed to accept that. Then Laney blocked Dean's number on both of our phones. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Update 1: Dean tried calling Laney's work number 3 times before Laney's boss told him to stop. Then Dean started showing up at our parents' house when he knew I'd be there for Sunday dinners. Our parents kept insisting we all needed to talk things out and find a way past this disagreement. My dad actually used the word disagreement, as if Dean had borrowed my sweater without asking instead of lying to steal thousands of dollars. During one of these dinners, Dean sat across from me and went through this whole speech he'd clearly prepared. He said he understood why I was upset but I needed to see things from his perspective. He said being a new father was overwhelming and he'd made a mistake in how he asked for help. He said he'd been planning to tell me the truth eventually but things got complicated. He never actually apologized. The whole speech was just excuses and explanations for why his lying was somehow understandable. I didn't engage. I ate my food and talked to my mom about her garden. Dean got increasingly agitated when I wouldn't respond to him. He finally said I was being childish and holding a grudge over nothing. I put down my fork and told him I'd given him $6,000 because he said his daughter was sick. I told him he'd manipulated me by using a child's health as bait. I said I didn't want a relationship with someone who would do that. Then I left before dessert. My mom called me the next day saying I'd embarrassed Dean and made him leave right after I did. She said he'd been working so hard to make amends and I wouldn't even give him a chance. I asked her if she knew he'd lied about Ava being sick. She said yes, Dean had explained the whole situation to her and Dad. I asked her if she understood that what he did was fraud. She said fraud was a strong word and families should be able to work through money issues without involving legal terminology. I stopped going to Sunday dinners after that. My parents were disappointed but I told them I needed space from the situation. They said they respected my decision but hoped I'd reconsider soon because family was important. Meanwhile, Simone had been doing her own investigation. She'd gone through their bank statements and credit card records from the past year. She found out Dean had taken out a personal loan without telling her. He'd also opened 2 credit cards in his name only and maxed them both out. The party had cost nearly $9,000 and they were now in serious debt because of it. Simone called me in early January and asked if she could come over. She showed up with folders full of printed statements and receipts. She walked me through everything she'd found. Dean had been hiding money problems from her for over a year. He'd told her they were doing fine financially when in reality they were barely making minimum payments on multiple debts. The money I'd sent had been the only reason they could afford the party venue deposit. She said she'd given him an ultimatum. He needed to go to financial counseling and stop lying to her about money, or she was leaving. He'd refused, saying he didn't need counseling and that she was overreacting. She'd moved into her parents' house with Ava 3 days earlier. I asked her what she needed from me. She said she just wanted someone to talk to who understood what Dean was capable of. She said her parents were supportive but they'd never dealt with someone who lied so casually about important things. They kept suggesting marriage counseling and date nights, as if the problem was that Dean and Simone weren't spending enough quality time together. Simone stayed for several hours. We talked about Dean's history and the patterns I'd noticed growing up. She said she'd seen signs of this behavior early in their relationship but had convinced herself she was being paranoid or judgmental. She said he'd borrowed money from her parents twice during their engagement, claiming work emergencies both times. Her parents had never asked for the money back and she'd assumed he'd paid them eventually. It turned out he'd never repaid them at all. 2 weeks later, Simone sent me a message saying she'd sold a diamond bracelet her grandmother had left her. She said the bracelet had been appraised at $7,000 and she wanted to pay me back for the money Dean had stolen. I told her that wasn't necessary and I didn't want her to sell family heirlooms because of her husband's choices. She said she'd already sold it and the money was being transferred to my account. She said she couldn't move forward knowing I'd been lied to and she wanted to make it right. The money showed up in my account the next day. I tried to return it but Simone refused to take it back. She said accepting the money from Dean would have made her complicit in his lie, and she wouldn't do that. Dean found out about the bracelet somehow and completely lost it. He started posting on social media about family betrayal and toxic relatives who destroy marriages. He didn't mention me by name but it was obvious who he meant. Several family members reached out asking what happened. I didn't respond to any of them. My mom called saying Dean was devastated that Simone had sold a priceless family heirloom because of me. I corrected her and said Simone had sold it because of Dean's lies. My mom said I was being technical and the real issue was that I couldn't forgive my brother for a simple mistake. I said stealing $6,000 wasn't a simple mistake. She said I was choosing money over family. I said Dean had made that choice, not me. Lainey's parents heard about the situation through my mom, who'd apparently called them looking for support. Lainey's dad called Dean directly and told him he was a disgrace and needed to take responsibility for his actions. Lainey's mom sent Simone a care package with groceries and household items. They told me they were proud of how I'd handled the situation and that I shouldn't let my parents guilt me into accepting Dean's behavior. Update 2: Simone filed for divorce in March. She'd given Dean multiple chances to admit what he'd done and work on changing, but he kept insisting everyone else was the problem. He told her I'd poisoned her against him and that his life was falling apart because of my vindictiveness. She said she couldn't stay married to someone who took no responsibility for anything. Dean moved back in with our parents. They were happy to have him home and kept telling anyone who would listen how hard things were for him. My dad helped him find a job at a warehouse through a friend. Dean lasted 3 weeks before quitting, claiming the manager was targeting him unfairly. The custody arrangement gave Simone primary custody with Dean getting Ava every other weekend. Simone told me he'd missed his first 2 scheduled weekends entirely. The first time he said he had the flu. The second time he just didn't show up and didn't answer her calls until the following Tuesday. In April, Dean started dating someone he'd met online. Her name was Rachel, 29F, and according to his social media, they were incredibly happy together. He posted photos of them constantly with captions about new beginnings and finding someone who truly understood him. Rachel seemed nice enough from what I could see, though I didn't look too closely at his posts. One Saturday in May, Rachel showed up at my house. She introduced herself and asked if we could talk. I invited her in and made coffee. She said she'd been dating Dean for 2 months and things had moved quickly. He'd told her he was divorced and shared custody of his daughter. He'd told her his ex-wife was difficult and his family had taken her side in the divorce. He'd told her I was his estranged sister who'd refused to loan him money when he needed help with legal fees. I asked her why she was telling me this. She said she'd met Simone the previous weekend when Dean picked up Ava. Simone had been polite but mentioned something about being glad Dean had paid me back. Rachel had asked Dean about it later and he'd gotten angry and defensive. He'd told her Simone was trying to start drama and she needed to ignore anything his ex-wife said. Rachel said the interaction had bothered her enough that she'd done some digging. She'd asked Dean's friends about the divorce and gotten vague answers. She'd looked through Dean's social media history and found the posts from November about family betrayal. She'd put together enough pieces to realize Dean's version of events didn't match reality. I gave her the basic facts. Dean had lied to me about medical bills. I'd given him money that he used for a party. I'd told his wife the truth. He'd stolen from me and I decided not to maintain a relationship with him. I didn't editorialize or add my opinions. I just stated what had happened. Rachel thanked me for being honest. She said she'd been falling in love with Dean, but now she wasn't sure who he really was. She left after finishing her coffee. Dean called me the next day from a number I didn't recognize. I made the mistake of answering before checking. He screamed at me for 20 minutes about how I'd sabotaged his relationship and destroyed his chance at happiness. He said Rachel had broken up with him and it was my fault for filling her head with lies. He said I was a miserable person who couldn't stand to see him succeed at anything. He said I'd taken everything from him, including his wife, his daughter, his family, and now the woman he loved. I waited until he stopped talking and then asked if he was finished. He said I owed him an apology and money for the therapy he now needed because of the stress I'd caused. I hung up and blocked that number too. Lainey suggested we change our phone numbers, but I didn't want to deal with updating all our contacts and accounts. Instead, I set both our phones to only accept calls from saved contacts. Anyone else went straight to voicemail. My parents called asking why Dean couldn't reach me. I said I'd blocked him and had no plans to change that. My dad said I was being unreasonable and that Dean was struggling with depression because of how I'd treated him. I said Dean was experiencing consequences for his own choices. My mom said I was cold and unforgiving. I said I was protecting myself from someone who'd proven he would lie and steal from me. Neither of them had a response to that. Simone and I met for coffee occasionally. She'd gotten a promotion at work and was saving up to move into a larger apartment. Ava was thriving and seemed happy despite the changes in her family structure. Simone said Dean had started showing up for his custody weekends more regularly, though she suspected that had more to do with his dating life than actual interest in parenting. Update 3 in September, I got a friend request on social media from an account I didn't recognize. The profile had no photo and no posts. I ignored it. The next day, I got a message from that account. It was Dean using a fake profile to get around the block. The message was long and rambling. He said he'd had time to think about everything and realized he'd made mistakes. He said he'd been going through a dark period in his life and had handled things badly. He said he missed having me as his sister and wanted to rebuild our relationship. He said he understood if I needed more time, but he hoped we could eventually work things out. The message seemed genuine at first. Then I got to the last paragraph. He said he was in a tight spot financially and wondered if I could loan him $3,000 to cover rent and utilities until his next paycheck. He said he knew it was a lot to ask given our history, but he was desperate and I was the only person he could turn to. I showed the message to Lainey. He laughed and said at least Dean was consistent. I didn't respond to the message. I just blocked that account and reported it for using a fake identity. 2 weeks later, my mom called saying Dean was about to be evicted from his apartment. She said he needed money urgently and had asked her to reach out to me on his behalf. I asked her how much money Dean needed. She said $5,000. I asked her why she and Dad weren't helping him. She said they'd already loaned him money multiple times this year and couldn't afford to give him more. I told my mom I wouldn't be sending Dean any money now or ever. She said I was holding a grudge and punishing him indefinitely for one mistake. I said it wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that included lying, stealing, manipulating, and refusing to take responsibility. I said I was done being his backup plan when he needed money. My mom said she was disappointed in me and that family should help each other no matter what. I said family should also be honest with each other and respect basic boundaries. She hung up on me. Dean did get evicted. He moved back in with our parents permanently. According to family gossip, he's working part-time at a grocery store and spending most of his time playing video games. Simone has full custody now because Dean stopped showing up for his weekends again. I haven't spoken to Dean since that phone call in May. I haven't seen my parents since the spring. They send occasional text messages asking when I'll visit, but I don't respond. Lainey's parents have become my primary family connection. They invite us over regularly and treat me like their daughter. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently. Then I remember the phone call at 3 a.m. when Dean cried about his sick baby who was never actually sick. I remember him screaming at me that his problems were my fault. I remember him trying to manipulate me into sending more money after everything that happened. The $6,000 Simone paid back is sitting in a savings account. Lainey and I decided to keep it separate from our regular accounts. We're not sure what we'll do with it yet. It doesn't feel right to spend it on ourselves given how Simone acquired it. Simone is doing well. She met someone new, a guy named Tom who works at the hospital where she does dental work. He knows about Dean and doesn't seem bothered by the baggage. He's good with Ava. Simone seems lighter now, like she's not carrying as much weight on her shoulders. Dean occasionally tries to reach out through relatives who haven't picked sides. His messages always follow the same pattern. Brief apology, explanation for his behavior, request for money or contact. I don't respond to any of them. My parents sent a Christmas card last year with a note saying they hoped I'd reconsider my stance because life was short and family was forever. I sent them a card back with just our names signed at the bottom. No personal note. No phone call. Just acknowledgement that I'd received their card. Lainey asked me recently if I ever regret cutting off my parents along with Dean. I told him no. They'd chosen to enable Dean's behavior and minimize what he'd done. They'd made me feel guilty for protecting myself from someone who'd proven he would hurt me for his own benefit. That wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted with anyone, family or not. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done. Dean burned that bridge himself when he decided lying to me was acceptable. My parents burned their bridge when they decided his feelings mattered more than my boundaries. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as either a resource or an obstacle. Life is quieter now. Sometimes quieter is better. Now let's move to the next story. Story 2. I kept my family's luxury hotel business secret from my boyfriend for 4 years, but when he found out during our Greece trip, he became a gold digger. He demanded I pay his student loans, then tried to start a business using my family's reputation. I need to get this off my chest because the whole situation has been eating at me for weeks now. My boyfriend Eric, 29M, and I, 27F, have been together for 4 years. We met at a coffee shop near his office where I was working part-time while finishing my graduate degree. He was this charming guy who would come in every Tuesday and Thursday, always ordering the same thing, medium coffee with oat milk and a blueberry muffin. Eric works as a marketing coordinator at a mid-sized tech company. He's been there for 3 years and takes his job seriously. He drives a used Honda Civic that he bought 2 years ago and lives in a decent one-bedroom apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but he manages his money well and never seemed to struggle financially. We split most of our expenses when we go out, though I sometimes pick up the tab when we try more expensive restaurants. I live in a small studio apartment about 15 minutes from his place. I work remotely as a freelance graphic designer, which gives me flexible hours but inconsistent income. Some months I make decent money, other months things are tight. Eric has always been understanding about this and never made me feel bad when I couldn't contribute equally to our dates or activities. What Eric doesn't know is that my family owns a chain of luxury hotels across the Mediterranean. My grandfather started with one small hotel in Greece in the 1960s, and my father expanded the business throughout the 1980s and 1990s. Today, we have properties in Greece, Turkey, Croatia, and southern Italy. The business is worth millions, but I've never lived that lifestyle or talked about it with anyone here. I moved to the United States for college 8 years ago and decided to stay. My parents supported my decision to build my own life here, but they also made it clear that the family money wasn't something I should rely on or broadcast. They wanted me to understand the value of work and independence. I agreed with this philosophy and have been supporting myself through college, graduate school, and now my career. The few times I've mentioned my family's wealth to friends or previous boyfriends, things changed immediately. People started treating me differently, some became distant and weird, others suddenly wanted to hang out more often and suggested expensive activities they knew I could afford. One ex-boyfriend even asked me to loan him money for a car down payment after we'd only been dating for 6 months. These experiences taught me to keep my family's business private. With Eric, I never felt the need to bring it up. We had a solid relationship built on genuine connection and shared interests. He liked me for who I was as a person, not for any external circumstances. We enjoyed simple pleasures together, cooking dinner at home, hiking on weekends, watching movies, playing board games with his coworkers. I bought him thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, a nice watch for his promotion, a weekend camping trip for his birthday, some vintage vinyl records he'd been wanting. Nothing extravagant, just things that showed I cared about his interests. Earlier this summer, Eric mentioned that he'd been thinking about taking a vacation to Europe. He'd never been outside North America and had been saving money for over a year. I suggested that maybe I could show him around Greece since I grew up spending summers there with my grandparents. He was excited about the idea, especially since I could help navigate the language and culture. We planned the trip for late August. I told him I'd handle the accommodations since I had connections there, which wasn't technically a lie. I booked us a suite at one of my family's hotels in Santorini, but I presented it as a favor from a family friend in the hospitality business. Eric was impressed by the room and the service, but he just assumed I'd gotten lucky with a good deal. The problem started when we went to visit my parents. I'd told Eric that my father worked in the hotel industry, but I'd kept the details vague. When we pulled up to my childhood home, a large villa overlooking the Aegean Sea, Eric got quiet. The house sits on about 2 acres of landscaped grounds with a pool, tennis court, and guest house. It's beautiful but not obnoxiously ostentatious. During dinner, my parents talked about business expansion and mentioned meetings with investors and property developers. My mother discussed the interior design project she was overseeing for their newest hotel in Dubrovnik. Eric asked polite questions, but I could see him processing the information and starting to understand the scope of what he was hearing. On our last night, my father offered to give Eric a tour of their flagship hotel in Athens. It's a 5-star property with 2 restaurants, a spa, and a rooftop bar that's become pretty famous on social media. During the tour, my father explained some of the history and mentioned that I'd grown up spending time at all their properties, learning the business from the ground up. The flight home was awkward. Eric asked direct questions about my family's wealth and why I'd never mentioned it. I explained that I preferred to keep my personal life separate from my family's business, and that I wanted people to know me for who I am, not for my family's success. He said he understood, but something had shifted in how he looked at me. The changes started small. About a week after we got back, Eric began making comments about our lifestyle and future plans. He mentioned that we could afford to move into a nicer place together, maybe somewhere with a view or better amenities. When I said I was happy with our current living situation, he seemed frustrated. Then came the bigger suggestions. Eric started talking about how we should invest in real estate together, maybe buy a condo that we could rent out for passive income. He researched luxury car dealerships and showed me pictures of BMWs and Audis, saying we could easily afford something nicer than his old Honda. When I pointed out that these were expensive purchases that we should think carefully about, he reminded me that money wasn't really an issue for us anymore. The language change was subtle but significant. Instead of talking about his goals and plans, Eric started using terms like our money and our opportunities. He mapped out scenarios where we could travel extensively, buy investment properties, and live a completely different lifestyle than what we'd been building together. About 3 weeks after Greece, Eric suggested that I should help him pay off his student loans. He owed about $35,000 and was making minimum payments while putting extra money toward his savings. His reasoning was that since we were planning a future together, it made sense to eliminate his debt so we could focus on bigger investments. The way he presented it made it sound like a practical decision rather than a request for a large sum of money. I told him I needed to think about it. The amount wasn't significant compared to my family's wealth, but something about the request bothered me. We weren't engaged or married, and his debt was manageable with his current income. It felt like he was looking for ways to benefit from my family's money rather than continuing to build his own financial stability. Things came to a head last month when Eric proposed that we take a Christmas vacation to Japan. He'd found an expensive tour package that included first-class flights, luxury hotels, and private guides. The total cost was nearly $15,000. When I hesitated, he got defensive and said that we could afford it, so why wouldn't we go? I tried to explain that just because my family has money doesn't mean I want to spend it carelessly or that I'm comfortable making large financial decisions quickly. Eric responded that I was being selfish and that if I truly cared about our relationship, I would want to create amazing experiences together. That conversation lasted for hours and ended with both of us saying things we probably shouldn't have. Eric accused me of being stingy and playing games with him. He said that I'd essentially been lying to him for 4 years by not telling him about my family's wealth. I pointed out that I never lied about anything, I just didn't volunteer information that wasn't relevant to our relationship. We didn't talk for 3 days after that fight. When Eric finally called, he apologized for getting heated, but he also said that he'd been doing some thinking about our future. He wanted to know if I was serious about our relationship, because if I was, then we needed to start making decisions like a team instead of me keeping him in the dark about our resources. The conversation felt like an ultimatum. Either I start involving him in financial decisions and planning, or he would question my commitment to our relationship. He wanted transparency about my family's business and my access to money. He also wanted to discuss how we could use those resources to build a better life together. I've been avoiding giving him a direct answer for the past 2 weeks. We've seen each other a few times, but the tension is obvious. Eric has been sending me articles about couples who successfully blend their finances and plan investments together. He's also been more attentive than usual, bringing me flowers and suggesting romantic dates, which feels like he's trying to smooth things over while waiting for my decision. The whole situation has changed how I see our relationship. For 4 years, I thought we were building something based on genuine compatibility and shared values. Now I'm wondering if Eric is more interested in the lifestyle my family's money could provide than in the relationship we've actually created together. I don't know how to move forward. Part of me wants to believe that his reaction is just surprise and excitement about new possibilities, and that he'll settle back into the person I fell in love with. But another part of me worries that he's already decided that our relationship should revolve around financial opportunities rather than the connection we've built. I'm not sure if I'm being unfair by keeping boundaries around my family's money, or if Eric is being unreasonable by expecting access to resources that aren't technically mine. The whole thing has made me question whether it's possible to have a normal relationship when there's this kind of wealth disparity, even if it's kept in the background. Update 1. I thought I should update everyone on what happened after my original post. The situation got much worse before it got better, and I learned some things about Eric that I wish I'd known earlier. After I posted here, I decided to have an honest conversation with Eric about boundaries and expectations. I told him that while I understood his excitement about new possibilities, I needed him to respect that my family's money wasn't something I wanted to factor into our relationship decisions right now. I suggested that we continue building our life together at the pace we'd established, and that if we got engaged or married, we could revisit financial planning then. Eric seemed to accept this at first. He apologized for pressuring me and said he understood my perspective. For about a week, things felt normal again. We went back to our usual routines, dinner at home, weekend activities that didn't cost much, and conversations about everyday topics rather than future financial plans. But then I started noticing small changes in his behavior. Eric began making subtle comments about money and lifestyle choices. When we'd walk past expensive restaurants, he'd mention that we could afford to eat there regularly. If I bought generic groceries instead of name brands, he'd suggest that we didn't need to worry about saving a few dollars here and there. When his coworkers talked about wanting to buy houses or go on expensive vacations, Eric would give me meaningful looks. The bigger issue was that Eric started researching my family's business online. He found articles about our hotels, industry publications that mentioned my father, and even some social media posts from guests at our properties. He began asking specific questions about occupancy rates, expansion plans, and profit margins. When I told him I didn't really know those details, he seemed skeptical. One evening in late October, Eric brought up the subject of his student loans again. This time, he presented it differently. He'd calculated that the interest he was paying monthly was more than we spent on groceries, and he argued that eliminating the debt would free up money for us to spend on experiences together. He also mentioned that his coworkers were impressed that he was dating someone from a successful family, and that paying off his loans would put him in a better position to contribute equally to our relationship. I asked him what he meant about his coworkers being impressed, and that's when I learned that Eric had been talking about my family's business at work. He'd shown people pictures from our Greece trip and explained about the hotels. He'd even mentioned specific financial details that he'd gathered from his research. When I told him I was uncomfortable with him sharing this information, Eric said that he wasn't ashamed of being with someone successful, and that I shouldn't be either. This was the first time I realized that Eric had fundamentally misunderstood the situation. He wasn't just excited about new financial possibilities, he was proud of the status he thought my family's wealth gave him. He'd started defining our relationship in terms of what it looked like to other people rather than what it meant to us. In November, Eric's behavior became more concerning. He started making unilateral decisions about our social life, suggesting expensive restaurants and activities without asking if I was interested. When I'd propose cheaper alternatives, he'd act confused and remind me that we could afford better. He also began talking about our future with more specificity, describing the house we'd buy, the cars we'd drive, and the vacations we'd take. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving weekend. Eric had been invited to his cousin's wedding, and he asked me to be his date. I was happy to go, but when we were getting ready, Eric suggested that I wear some jewelry that would show we were doing well financially. He'd noticed that I usually wore simple pieces, and he thought it would be good for me to dress more appropriately for my background. At the wedding, Eric introduced me to his relatives as his girlfriend whose family owns luxury hotels in Europe. He spent the entire reception talking about our trip to Greece and showing pictures of the properties. Several people asked me direct questions about the business, and I had to redirect conversations multiple times because Eric had created expectations that I couldn't or wouldn't meet. On the drive home, I told Eric that I was uncomfortable with how he'd presented our relationship at the wedding. I explained that I didn't want to be known primarily for my family's business, and that I'd prefer if he introduced me simply as his girlfriend. Eric got defensive and said that he was proud of what my family had accomplished, and that I was being unnecessarily secretive. That conversation escalated into our biggest fight yet. Eric accused me of being ashamed of my family and of wanting to hide an important part of who I am. I tried to explain that I wasn't ashamed, I just wanted our relationship to be about us, not about external circumstances. Eric said that was naive, and that pretending money doesn't matter wouldn't make it true. The fight ended with Eric saying that he was tired of walking on eggshells around the subject of my family's wealth. He said that if I couldn't be open about this part of my life, then maybe I wasn't ready for a serious adult relationship. He wanted me to think about whether I was willing to be a real partner or if I was going to keep treating our relationship like a casual college romance. We didn't speak for a week after that. When Eric finally contacted me, it was through a long text message. He said that he'd been thinking about our relationship and that he realized we had different visions for our future. He wanted to build something significant together, using all the resources and opportunities available to us. He felt like I was holding us back by refusing to acknowledge what we could accomplish together. Eric also mentioned that he'd been talking to his brother, who works in finance, about investment strategies for couples with significant assets. His brother had given him advice about how to approach financial planning when one partner has substantial family wealth. Eric said he learned a lot from these conversations and wanted to share this information with me. I realized then that Eric had been treating our relationship like a business opportunity. He wasn't just excited about the money, he was strategizing about how to access and use it. He'd been researching, planning, and consulting with other people about how to manage a relationship with someone from a wealthy family. When we finally met in person in early December, Eric presented me with a folder of information he'd compiled. It included printouts of articles about family wealth management, notes from his conversations with his brother, and even a rough budget for how we could structure our finances if we moved in together. He'd put significant time and effort into creating what he called a plan for our future. Looking at that folder, I realized that Eric had been working on this project for months. While I thought we were navigating a relationship challenge together, he'd been developing a comprehensive strategy for accessing my family's money. The research, the conversations with his coworkers and family, the pressure about student loans, it had all been part of a larger plan. I told Eric that I needed some time to process everything he'd shown me. He seemed confident that once I reviewed his research, I'd understand his perspective and be ready to move forward with his suggestions. He said he'd give me a week to think about it, but that he hoped I'd realize this was the best path for both of us. That was 3 weeks ago. I haven't contacted Eric since then, and I've been trying to figure out how I feel about everything that happened. The relationship I thought we had apparently never existed. Eric had been playing a different game entirely, one where the goal was leveraging my family's success for his own benefit. I keep thinking about the 4 years we spent together and wondering how much of it was genuine. Did he actually care about me as a person, or was he just positioning himself for this opportunity? I'll probably never know for sure, but the fact that he transformed so completely after learning about my family's business tells me everything I need to know about his priorities. Update 2: I have to share what happened over the holidays because it was worse than I expected. I thought Eric had shown his true colors already, but apparently there was more to discover. I spent Christmas with my family in Greece, which gave me time to think about everything without pressure from Eric. I've been avoiding his calls and messages for about 3 weeks, and I thought maybe the distance would help me figure out how to end things cleanly. While I was there, my mother mentioned that she'd been getting friend requests and messages on social media from someone named Eric. She showed me the messages, and I was horrified. Eric had found my parents' social media accounts and had been trying to connect with them directly. His messages were polite but clearly designed to bypass me and establish a relationship with my family. In the messages, Eric introduced himself as my boyfriend and mentioned how much he'd enjoyed meeting them during our visit. He asked about their holiday plans and mentioned that he hoped to visit Greece again soon. He also complimented their business success and said he was interested in learning more about the hospitality industry. My father had also received a LinkedIn connection request from Eric, along with a message about potential business opportunities. Eric had mentioned that he worked in marketing and wondered if there might be ways for him to contribute to their hotel marketing strategies. He included his resume and some examples of campaigns he'd worked on. I was mortified. Eric was trying to establish professional and personal relationships with my parents without telling me. He was essentially trying to go around me to get access to my family and their business connections. When I confronted Eric about this over the phone, he didn't seem to understand why I was upset. He said that he thought my parents were nice people and that he wanted to maintain a connection with them regardless of what happened between us. He also said that his marketing experience could genuinely be valuable to their business, and that he was just exploring possibilities. I told Eric that contacting my family without my knowledge was completely inappropriate and that he needed to stop immediately. He got defensive and said that I was being controlling and that my parents were adults who could decide for themselves whether they wanted to talk to him. That conversation ended badly, with Eric accusing me of trying to isolate him from people who had become important to him. He said that my family had welcomed him warmly during our visit, and that it was unfair for me to cut off those relationships just because we were having problems. When I got back to the United States in early January, I found that Eric had been busy while I was gone. He'd sent me several packages containing what he called investments in our future. One package had brochures for luxury condos in downtown areas, along with notes about which properties would be good rental investments. Another contained information about European travel packages and a note saying he'd been planning a surprise trip for my birthday. The most concerning package contained a business proposal. Eric had developed a detailed plan for a marketing consultancy that would specialize in luxury hospitality brands. The proposal included my family's hotels as potential anchor clients, projected revenue based on contracts with similar businesses, and a timeline for launching the company. He'd put together a comprehensive business plan that assumed I would provide startup funding and family connections. I realized that Eric hadn't just been thinking about our personal relationship, he'd been developing a career strategy based on access to my family's business network. The marketing consultancy wasn't just an idea, it was a calculated plan to monetize his connection to me. When I called Eric to discuss the packages, he was excited and enthusiastic. He thought I'd be impressed by his initiative and planning. He'd spent weeks researching the hospitality marketing industry and had identified what he saw as a genuine business opportunity. He wanted to schedule a meeting to go through the proposal in detail and discuss funding options. I told Eric that I wasn't interested in mixing business with our personal relationship, and that I was uncomfortable with him making plans that involved my family without consulting me first. Eric seemed genuinely confused by my response. He said that successful couples often work together professionally, and that this could be a way for us to build something meaningful while utilizing all our available resources. The conversation revealed how differently we'd been thinking about our relationship. Eric saw my family's business connections as assets that we should leverage together. He'd been planning our future around maximizing these opportunities, while I'd been trying to keep them separate from our personal life. Eric also mentioned that he'd been talking to more people about our situation. His brother, his parents, and several coworkers now knew about my family's business and had been giving him advice about how to handle the relationship. Some of them had encouraged him to be more aggressive about pursuing business opportunities, while others had warned him not to let me control access to valuable connections. I was stunned to learn that my private family information had become a topic of discussion among Eric's entire social circle. He'd been presenting our relationship challenges as a strategic problem that needed solving, rather than a personal matter between the two of us. During our last phone conversation, Eric asked me directly whether I was planning to break up with him. He said that if I was, he wanted to know soon because he had decisions to make about his career and future. He'd been putting other opportunities on hold while waiting for me to commit to his plans, and he needed to know whether to move forward with or without me. That question clarified everything for me. Eric wasn't fighting for our relationship, he was trying to determine whether his investment in me was going to pay off. He'd been treating our 4-year relationship like a business venture, and now he wanted to know if it was time to cut his losses or double down on his strategy. I told Eric that we were done. He asked if I was sure, and when I said yes, his response was immediate and practical. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to provide a reference for him if he decided to pursue opportunities in the hospitality industry independently. He also asked if I thought my parents would be open to discussing business possibilities with him directly, since he'd already established contact with them. Even in the moment I was ending our relationship, Eric was trying to salvage the business connections he'd been cultivating. He wasn't asking about getting back together or working through our problems, he was asking about maintaining access to the opportunities he'd been pursuing. I hung up on him and haven't answered his calls since then. Eric has sent several text messages asking me to reconsider and saying that he thinks we could still find a way to work together even if we don't continue dating. He's also mentioned that he's spoken with his brother about other ways to break into the luxury hospitality market, and that he's grateful for the insights he gained from our relationship. I've blocked Eric on all social media and asked my parents to do the same. My mother was disappointed because she'd thought he was a nice young man, but she understood my concerns when I explained what had been happening. My father was less surprised and said that he'd sensed Eric was more interested in business opportunities than in me personally. The whole experience has been a lesson in how money changes people, even when they don't have direct access to it. Eric wasn't just attracted to the idea of wealth, he was energized by the possibility of leveraging it for his own advancement. Our relationship became a means to an end rather than something valuable in itself. Update 3: I'm writing this final update because some people have been asking what happened after I cut contact with Eric, and because there were a few more developments that I think are worth sharing. After I blocked Eric everywhere, I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Eric spent the next month trying to find ways to contact me and my family. He sent messages through mutual friends, tried calling me from different phone numbers, and even showed up at my apartment building twice. The first time he came to my building, Eric waited in the lobby until I came home from work. He wanted to give me a letter he'd written explaining his perspective on everything that had happened. The letter was 10 pages long and detailed his thoughts about our relationship, his business proposal, and his plans for the future. He'd also included copies of research he'd done about successful business partnerships between couples, and examples of other people who had built companies using family connections. I read the letter once and then threw it away. Eric had written it like a business memo rather than a personal communication. He outlined his qualifications, his market research, and his projected outcomes, but he never mentioned missing me or wanting to repair our relationship for its own sake. The second time Eric came to my building, he brought a small gift and asked the doorman to deliver it to me. Inside was a jewelry box containing a necklace that cost more than Eric usually spent on gifts. The card said that he'd been thinking about me and hoped we could find a way to move forward together. I realized that Eric was still trying to demonstrate his commitment using financial gestures, which showed that he still didn't understand what had gone wrong between us. He was trying to prove his worthiness as a partner by spending money, rather than addressing the fundamental issues with how he'd been treating our relationship. Around this time, I learned from a mutual friend that Eric had been telling people a different version of our breakup story. According to his version, I'd broken up with him because my family disapproved of him and pressured me to end the relationship. He said that my parents thought he wasn't good enough for me and that they wanted me to date someone from a wealthy family. This story made me angry because it was completely false and because it made my family look like snobs. My parents had actually liked Eric during our visit to Greece, and they'd been disappointed when I told them about his behavior afterward. They'd never expressed any opinion about who I should date based on money or social status. I asked our mutual friend to correct the story, but the damage was already done. Several people in our social circle now had the impression that my family was controlling and elitist. Some of them seemed to sympathize with Eric and view him as a victim of wealthy people's prejudices. The situation got worse when Eric started posting on social media about personal growth and overcoming obstacles. His posts were vague but clearly designed to generate sympathy. He wrote about learning to value himself despite other people's judgments, and about pursuing his dreams even when others tried to hold him back. People who didn't know the full story began commenting with support and encouragement. Eric's narrative had positioned him as someone who'd been rejected for not being wealthy enough, and his friends and family were rallying around him. Meanwhile, I looked like the spoiled rich girl who'd broken up with her boyfriend because he wasn't good enough for my family. In February, I found out that Eric had actually followed through on his hospitality marketing business idea. He'd partnered with a college friend who had some experience in digital marketing, and they'd started a small consultancy focused on boutique hotels and luxury travel companies. Eric had been using his connection to my family's business as a selling point with potential clients. He mentioned in his marketing materials that he had insider knowledge of the luxury hospitality industry and that he'd developed expertise through personal relationships with successful hotel owners. He wasn't lying exactly, but he was definitely stretching the truth. Eric had spent maybe 10 hours total around my family's business during our trip to Greece, and most of that time had been as a tourist rather than as someone learning about hotel operations. When I learned about this, I decided I needed to take action. I contacted Eric directly and told him that he needed to remove any references to my family or their business from his marketing materials. I explained that he didn't have permission to use their names or reputation to promote his company. Eric responded that he'd never mentioned my family by name in his materials, and that his references to industry knowledge were general rather than specific. He said that his experience was legitimate and that he had every right to mention his background in the hospitality industry. This led to several unpleasant phone conversations where Eric and I argued about what constituted appropriate use of information he'd gained through our relationship. He maintained that his knowledge and connections were fair game since they'd been shared with him openly during our time together. I ended up having to get my father involved, which was embarrassing for me. My father contacted Eric directly and made it clear that any business use of their company name or reputation would result in legal action. He also asked Eric to stop contacting family members on social media. Eric complied with my father's request, but he wasn't happy about it. He sent me a final message saying that he was disappointed in how I'd handled the situation, and that he thought I'd overreacted by involving my family. He said that he'd been trying to build something positive out of our relationship, and that I'd chosen to be destructive instead of supportive. That message confirmed that Eric still saw our relationship primarily in terms of what he could gain from it. Even after everything that had happened, he was focused on lost opportunities rather than on the personal connection we'd shared. It's been about a month since I last heard from Eric. I've gradually been rebuilding my social life and reconnecting with friends who weren't involved in the drama. Some people still have the wrong impression about why we broke up, but I've decided not to spend energy correcting every misconception. I've also been thinking about what I learned from this experience. Eric wasn't necessarily a bad person, but he was someone who got overwhelmed by the possibility of accessing wealth and status. Once he saw those opportunities, he couldn't think about our relationship in the same way anymore. The situation taught me that I need to be more careful about how and when I share information about my family's business. I don't want to hide who I am, but I also don't want to attract people who are more interested in my background than in me personally. I'm not planning to date anyone for a while. I want to focus on my own career and interests without having to navigate the complications that come with my family's wealth. Maybe eventually I'll find someone who can handle this information appropriately, but for now, I'm content to be on my own. Eric's marketing company is apparently doing okay, based on what I can see from their website and social media. He's found other ways to establish credibility in the hospitality industry, and he seems to be building a legitimate business. I hope he's successful, but I'm glad I'm not part of it. The whole experience was exhausting and disappointing, but it also clarified what I want in a relationship. I want someone who's interested in building a life together based on shared values and genuine connection, not someone who sees me as a pathway to opportunities they couldn't access on their own. I'm still figuring out how to balance my family's success with my own independence, but at least now I know what red flags to watch for. The next person I date will have to prove that they're interested in me as an individual before they learn anything about my family's business.